It's weird how that happens sometimes because it's the same stuff basically across both sites.
Yeah, it's like, who cares? Arbitrage betting.
Just good morning, everybody. It is the Awesemo MLB strategy show, and it would be cool if FanDuel and DraftKings could link up in some sense and give us the same start times for both slates, which is not going to be the case today. So we have a couple of games to talk about that are on the FanDuel slate that aren't on the DraftKings slate. But do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and shout out to Prize Picks, who is the sponsor of today's show. If you're signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo, get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Eric, first of all, how are you doing? Second, how do you like today's slate?
Doing well. Yesterday was a really good NBA slate together. I don't know. I feel like we were on everything. Mason Plumlee, I had a little bit too much of him. Otherwise, it could have been a massive night on DraftKings. And FanDuel worked out really nicely. Capella, my second highest owned center behind J-Val. And J-Val played great. Still needed Capella, no doubt about it. But it was a fun NBA slate. Now MLB, I kind of like when you have two different start times for sites because you know me, I'm working down to the wire, making everything work. So 6:35 p.m. Eastern time for FanDuel. You get that Washington-Pittsburgh game. I kind of like that. You get all those lineups done, then you jump over to DraftKings and finish everything up there. That's just kind of my personal preference.
I like any slate that doesn't have weather concerns, which seems to be one of the ones that we have today. And yeah, yesterday was good for NBA. Yesterday was also good for MLB. And a quick question here that we have that I could answer this in like 5 seconds from Choke Hold'em in our YouTube chat. He says he can't figure out how to make how to crunch double stacks in Cruncher. You have to make 2 sets of stacks. So you could even make it and then just clone that stack to make a second one. And then I don't know if you're playing on FanDuel or DraftKings, but if it's FanDuel and you're looking to make 4 stacks, you can just clone it and it'll be the same thing with 4-man stacks. If you're making a DraftKings stack and the first one is 5-man and you're making a clone, then you just set that to a 3-man stack in the top left corner. But that's what you have to do. You have to make 2 separate stacking things. And if that answers your question, cool. If not, just DM me on Twitter and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. And then, and also it helps if it depends. If you're playing DraftKings where you're trying to go 5-3, 5-2 and doing things like that, use the disable stack and recrunch some extra lineups just to add to the lineup portfolio. That's the easiest way to kind of do it for that. As you said with FanDuel, though, if you're doing 4-4, pretty much a no-brainer. Clone it, fix some stuff you want to do, make sure that like you're not getting 2 super high-owned stacks together.
Yeah. And then one other thing also is before the season started, so a week ago, we did record some strategy videos. One I did with Alex, just going over the tools on the site. And then he made one about how he uses Fantasy Cruncher to build MLB lineup. So if anybody wants to check that is in there's a playlist for it just in like general DFS strategy type stuff. So that's something else you could use that will help you learn how to use the different ins and outs of Fantasy Cruncher, at least how Alex uses it. But let's talk about today's slate now. And starting with a game that is on FanDuel, not on DraftKings, is going to apply for the first couple games on the slate. FanDuel exclusives. The Washington Nationals on the road against the Pittsburgh Pirates, close to a pick'em game. We've got a 9-run total. Jonah Don is on the mound for Washington. JT Brubaker on the mound for Pittsburgh. So now, starting with the Don, here's the positive. First start of the year, had no pitch count against the New York Mets, it seemed. They let him go way deeper than he should have. He was my most rostered pitcher on the slate that he went on. Yeah, and he was really good through 4 innings. And then in the 5th inning, he came out, he walked the bases loaded. It was like, surely they'll take him out now. No. They left him in and he gave up a grand slam to Pete Alonso. But he did start out really well. I do think he is really good stuff. I think the matchup against Pittsburgh is a favorable one, but there's not that much need to roster him on a single pitcher site like FanDuel, and he's not on the DraftKings slate. So that is going to take him out of play for me. What do you make of the 2 pitchers in this spot? I don't think either of them are necessary because it's FanDuel exclusive single pitcher site.
Yeah, single pitcher site. If you had to play one of the 2, just because of the pitch count, I'll go Adon and JT Brubaker. Not really my favorite guy to be getting to, period. It's just, he's meh. I feel like I rostered him quite a bit last year on DK as like an SP2 in some spots, but nothing enticing whatsoever. You get obviously Nelson Cruz in that lineup, and that's another righty that can really cause some issues. But going back to 2021 for Brubaker, 4.63 expected ERA. It's a lot lower than his 5.36 actual ERA. So maybe some positive regressions in store for him this season. For the most part, though, he gives up a lot of hard contact. He had a max exit velocity, 115.9 miles per hour last season. That was bottom 10% of the league. So I'm looking at him as a guy that we're going to be targeting a little bit more than playing.
Yeah. And once again, if these were cheap guys, we could look at it as SP2s on DK. It would be a totally different situation, but that's just not the case. So let's talk about some of the offenses where I think could be a little bit more relevant. Neither of these offenses are great in the Pirates and the Nationals, but there is reason to think that there could potentially be some upside in these spots. The Nationals are actually going to be a little bit popular on FanDuel, as are the Pittsburgh Pirates, shockingly so. A team that's picked up a lot of ownership in the early going of the season. So I want to ask you, what do you make of the Pirates projected to have 11% ownership as a team on FanDuel?
Gross. Alex Baker talked all the time doing baseball shows with them last year that most of the time these value stacks, they can get you in a lot of trouble. They're going to all be popular. They're almost all going to be paired up with the best pitchers on the board. It's just very hard to get different in that kind of a regard. And a team like Pittsburgh, there's just not that much upside, I don't think, in this lineup top to bottom. And that really isn't a strong stand by any means. Can you play Brian Hayes? Is he going to be one of the best young baseball players? I probably think so, but that's one guy in the middle of this lineup. Brian Reynolds is a major league hitter, hasn't shown yet in a week, but it's such a small sample size. He's going to be just fine going forward. But outside of that, I don't really see a whole lot I want to be getting to. Kevin Newman, no thanks. On FanDuel specifically, they're just going a little bit over-owned for my liking.
Yeah, more than a little bit over-owned. This is the team. Yeah, I'm pretty sure second most negatively leveraged or third most negatively leveraged stacked team. But either way, this is a lot of ownership going to a team that is frankly not a good offense. And the other part of it too is, sure, they offer good salary savings, but what do we need those salary savings for on this slate? Like, Ohtani's a fine pay up option at pitcher for FanDuel purposes, but he's at 10,800. I don't necessarily love the spot from on the road in Texas, but also, 10,800, it's not like we're paying 13,000 or 12,000 for a pitcher. I just don't think that this is a necessary salary savings at offense on a slate with so much offensive firepower. Are the Nationals a team you're more inclined to get to than the Pirates?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of surprising to me looking at the top stack percentage over on FanDuel, 6% for Washington, 6.6% here for Pittsburgh. I mean, I think some of that has to have to do with the top value percentage, where Pittsburgh is just cheap across the board and it's so easy to fit them into lineups. Whereas Washington, if you want to pay the full freight, so does 4,200. Nelson Cruz is 3,100. That's one of my favorite one-off bats of the day for FanDuel purposes. I find it hard that I won't get to a lot of him. Any lefty, period. From now until the end of time, you kind of want to be set up to go out and about and roster Nelson Cruz. Seems like a pretty good decision. Outside of those two, again, it's just tough. Josh Bell, he's a little bit better, the switch hitter from the left side, but I'm all right rostering him against Brubaker here. Just not that enthusiastic. Maikel Franco had a big game the other night. I don't expect that to be his long-term form, but he had some pop in Baltimore. Maybe there's some resurgence in store for him, but not exactly that enthusiastic. It's going to be pretty much Soto, Cruz, Bell. That's going to be this team pretty much the entire season for me. Cesar Hernandez, he's getting 7%. He's never a guy that I like to roster all that much. Feel like he always goes a little bit over-owned, but sub 10%, maybe I make him part of a stack.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking about the early slate in the chat. At the end, if you guys have any questions, we'll talk on it. It's hard to go really in depth with strategy for a 2-game slate because all of the pitchers and offenses are generally in play and there aren't that many options to choose from. But if you guys have any specific questions, we'll hit on it at the end after we're done talking about the main slate here. Next game to talk about, Philadelphia Phillies at the Miami Marlins. And I think we should start by talking about Sandy Alcantara. He is one of the better pitchers in the National League. The matchup against the Phillies isn't necessarily ideal on paper, but he's projected to be the most popular pitcher on FanDuel. He's the only one projected for over 20% owned, over 20% ownership. And in general, this is a slate with pretty flat ownership at the pitcher spot. There's only a few guys projected for double-digit ownership. The only two pitchers projected for more than 15% ownership are Charlie Morton and Sandy Alcantara. What do you make of Alcantara and his ownership in this spot against Philly?
Yeah, it's a lot, but I kind of get it. I really do kind of get it. I think you've got a spot where you get these savings types pitchers and you get a Coors Field slate. And I think that it's just kind of a perfect storm. He's 9,300, cheaper than your Ohtani 10.8. I think it's pretty serviceable and pretty easy just making some stacks before the show to be able to have Alcantara on FanDuel and play him alongside some Coors bats. Now, I think his fastball is just going to constantly be a weapon for him going forward. I'd like to see some of these other off-speed offerings. The slider, he's throwing 35% of the time. I mean, he's just absolutely tippy top of the league in terms of starters in fastball velocity. he can throw it by some of these guys, but you have Kyle Schwarber added to this lineup. You have some power up and down where, those solo shots can definitely inflict some damage, but I think he's going to be pretty serviceable in this spot. I feel maybe a little bit better about him than you do.
Well, I'm not saying I dislike him. I think that he's maybe number one, I think he's a little bit too popular. Number two, I don't know what the upside is in him just because he hasn't been a high strikeout pitcher for the majority of his career. 19% his first start this year, whatever, it's only one start. But for his career, he has a 21% K rate. He's not somebody who's going to go out and just totally blow away hitters in general. So I think I view him as more of a floor play than a ceiling play.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I mean, last season, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'd like to see, some of these off-speed offerings, the sinker, the slider. I mean, he had an 18% whiff percentage on the sinker, 38.3% on the slider. That's decent enough. The changeup ball right there. He's really not garnering swings and misses with the fastball, but a lot of guys aren't. They're not going to throw it by a lot of these guys unless you're hitting 100 and you're basically trying to set it up location wise to get the K's in that direction. And that's why you're seeing he was dead middle of the pack in the league last season in terms of K percentage. So I'm all right getting to Alcantara, but as you said, maybe I got to be taking a little bit more of a look at it. It just feels like I think the ownership is appropriate on him. I'm definitely going to have shares. And so a pitcher that I like long-term, I think he's somebody that will eventually really see a spike to those Ks.
By the way, I don't know what it is with bees, but they just keep flying into my window while I'm doing the show. It's very weird. I'm just getting dive bombed by bees. Yeah, right in front of me. They're just smashing into the window.
Why are you not running in the other direction? I would be out of that room.
I'm indoors.
So oh,
well, there's a window, Eric.
Yeah. Oh, I thought the window was open. Oh, I was like,
no. I'm protected. I'm protected. I live indoors. Super chat from You Don't Know JD. Had a busy day yesterday and forgot about early lock for the main slate. Opened up the top stacks tool 5 minutes before lock and binked all the low dollar entries for FanDuel. Turned $60 into $1,500. Thanks, boys. Well, sounds like that had more to do with the tools and your own doing, how you interpreted that data than Eric and I individually. But congrats and good stuff. Good stuff by you. Let's hit on the other side of this game where it's going to be Kyle Gibson pitching against the Marlins offense. The Marlins are projected for very low ownership, only 1% projected ownership as a team. Kyle Gibson, very hard for me to consider at 9,800 because we talk about guys without much upside. Kyle Gibson fits that bill. He was really good at the start of last year, trailed off in the second half. I can't ever reasonably want to pay $9,800 for Kyle Gibson. So if I had to take a side of this, it would be the Marlins just because they're only 1% owned. But I think both the Marlins offense and Kyle Gibson relatively unappealing.
Oh, I disagree, my friend. I think Kyle Gibson's all right. I mean, I don't expect 10 Ks like we saw last time out against Oakland, but you're going to an Oakland offense, pretty abysmal. You're going to a Miami offense, improved, but still on the whole, pretty abysmal. Kyle Gibson saw a lot of improvement, and this is a guy that with the Minnesota Twins, I wanted more, but such is life with Texas. He's been very serviceable. I think he's just a guy in terms of getting that 6 innings that we're talking only FanDuel for this game. We don't have to consider it for the main slate on DK. So, I mean, we just saw seven innings out of him. He's right around 9% here compared to Sandy Alcantara, where he only has an 8.5% top pitcher percentage, but 20% ownership. I might be willing to get to more Kyle Gibson, only 1.5% less chance of being a top pitcher here, 10% owned right now. It's only $500 to get up there against a way worse offense in Miami comparatively to targeting Alcantara against Philadelphia. Sure, there's more strikeouts to be had, I think, in that Philadelphia lineup well, not even true going back to last year. So I think I have a little bit more interest just based on the pitch count, based on what we saw from Kyle Gibson first start out. You want to be early to the party on some of these guys if there's going to be massive improvement. So I definitely am going to be over the field on Gibson.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm probably just lower on Gibbs than you are. The first half of the year was really, really good for him last year. And then really, like I said, kind of trailed off in the second half where we saw his K rate was sub 20% in the second half of the season. His walk rate went way up to nearly 10%. So after the first year where he had an ERA barely over 2, the second half of the season, he had a 4.38 FIP, a 4.46 xFIP, and that was without really generating strikeouts. I think that's probably more who he is than who he was in the first half of the season, especially when you just look at his career numbers. he's never been a guy that's really lived up to some of the promise that he had when he first came into the league. So his 2020 numbers, 5.35 ERA, 5.62 expected ERA, 2019 when he was with your Twins, 4.84 ERA, 4.89 expected ERA. I think everything he did at the start of last year was fluky. I know he got off to a good start this year, so I just don't want to pay $9,800 for him. I think there's not that much chance of upside for him. If he goes out and strikes out a lot of people, proves me wrong, so be it. But that's kind of my read on Kyle Gibson. Yeah. And now we're hitting on games that are going to be on both the FanDuel and the DraftKings slate, because we're starting with the Toronto Blue Jays, New York Yankees now. Do us a favor, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, helps us out a whole bunch. When it comes to the Yankees and the Blue Jays, two of the better offenses in all of baseball. We also have two really high upside pitchers that I'm not exactly sure what to make of for this particular slate. Kevin Gausman and Luis Severino. The matchups are difficult. These guys both have a lot of strikeout upside. When you look at the pitchers, the offenses, there's a lot of upside and downside here. But what stands out to you the most?
I think Severino, it's going to be tough for me to land on. It's a 6-game slate, but I think there's enough guys with strong enough pitch counts. We only saw 3 innings out of him in his first outing, 65 pitches. I think I'll take my chances going elsewhere. Can he fan down a lot of guys in, 70, 75 pitches? Sure, he can. But do I want to take that shot against Toronto on this kind of a slate? I'm probably going to be shying away going his direction. Now, Kevin Gausman is a different kind of beast altogether. And this Yankees lineup, there's going to be strikeouts. There's going to be upside. This is a classic play, a lot of both sides for me going to Gausman. 80 pitches his first outing. 8,500 is a very serviceable tag for him at this number. I have a lot of interest. It's just a pitcher I've been high on forever. We saw a lot of improvement in San Francisco, and I expect more of the same here in the AL East.
I have a question for you. I've been talking with my friends about this. Luis Severino as a potential Cy Young bet. Oh, for right now, whatever. He's 7,400 on a small slate. It's hard to prioritize him because the pitch counts, like you said. Severino's stuff was really good in his first start of the year against Boston. Now, he only pitched 3 innings, like you said, but the fastball was still upper 90s. The breaking stuff looked good. The results, hard to put too much into him in only 3 innings. But look at the outlook of just pitchers in the American League in general. The AL pitching is so much worse than the NL pitching. It's crazy. And I think Garrett Cole, a lot of people know my stance on this. I just don't think he's the same pitcher without being able to use the sticky substances on his fingers. He is the overwhelming favorite to win the American League Cy Young. I just don't agree with that. I don't think that should be the case. And then I'm just trying to look for upside pitchers with longer shot odds, like Shohei Ohtani's 20-1. He's on today's slate. Luis Severino is 100-1. At 100-1, considering his stuff and that the fastball velocity was still in check in the first start, is that anything that you find to be appealing at all? I just want to add that kind of betting angle into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're the king of this. If anybody doesn't know, going back to last year, the man made a pretty penny on one Corbin Burns. And when I say a pretty penny, that's how he can afford all of his screenshots in the background that Tyler so lovingly put up there to cover up all this memorabilia, because the guy absolutely crushed. You were there early. You were there often. I'm pulling up the odds right now. I don't mind that because it's something where what happens towards the end of the season always gets weighted a little bit higher than what happens now. And so are people going to remember he pitched 3, 4, 5 innings to start off his first month of baseball? No, they're not. But if he starts fanning down, if he gets up to 90, 95 pitches a game very soon, in the next month and a half, and he starts mowing guys down at a 35% clip, which is something that I think he's very, very capable of doing, you're looking at some major upside. He plays on the biggest franchise in all of Major League Baseball. It's just what it is. The Yankees are. And so there's some primetime opportunity for him to, on Sunday nights, really show out. And, when you're talking about the human element of voters, I really like the opportunity of investing in like these blue chip type teams.
Yeah. And just so in YouTube chat, Red Skittles, it was fun. He said he'd rather sit on his balls than place a Cy Young bet on Luis Severino. But I'm also just looking at, I think the pitching sucks in the American League. And
I bet Dylan Cease before the season. That's where we're at here. I bet Dylan Cease at like 20-1.
Yeah. And which fine, that's a reasonable upside play, but he's also not, if you look at the favorites in the National League, for instance, where it's Corbin Burns, Max Scherzer, DeGrom's hurt, but still the pitching is so much better in the NL. And then you just kind of look at the AL, the favorites are now Garrett Cole, who I just do not think he's that caliber of pitcher right now. Could he win Cy Young? Yes, because once again, the competition isn't that much. Then it's Shane Bieber. Bieber's throwing 4 miles per hour less after a shoulder injury last year. Then it's Robbie Ray. I think that everything he did last year was fluky. And then Dylan Cease is next. These are not the best of pitchers that we have to offer in baseball. That's why I start to look at guys like Shohei Ohtani at 20-1 or Luis Severino at 100-1. By the way, here are the other players that have the same odds at 100-1 as Luis Severino. Jose Urquidy, Shane Baz, Aaron Savali, Jordan Montgomery. He's just a much
Drew Rasmussen is 100-1.
Yeah, I'm just saying that he's much better is much more realistic to win. I could see a path. And I'm just looking to try to find angles on the AL Cy Young because I don't like the favorite. So I just want to shout out that somebody I'm landing on for today at 7,400. I can't prioritize them. I'm going to get to some of them as an SP2 because it's a smaller slate. And once again, I still believe in the upside of Severino. I think we probably get somewhere around 5 innings from him today. More of a DK play than FanDuel. We have no chance of getting the quality start and pretty good chance we don't get the win bonus either. But let's talk about the offenses in this game because I think there's reason to like both of the pitchers, but the offenses, the Toronto Blue Jays only projected for 5% ownership today on FanDuel. Yankees also pretty comparably low owned. Then over on DraftKings, the Yankees are projected for 3% ownership. Same deal with the Toronto Blue Jays at 5%. These are two of the most positively leveraged stacks on the slate. And I want to be overweight to both of them just because of how good these offenses are. It doesn't even matter who the pitchers are. If I could roster the Toronto Blue Jays at really low ownership and positive leverage. Same with the Yankees. I want to get overweight to them, especially on a smaller slate. Are you on the same page as that? Kind of regardless of the pitching quality.
It's a no-brainer. I think we talked about this together a lot last year too, where Toronto was undervalued and you have to pay the full freight. They're expensive. So you're going to play some real garbage pitchers around them if you're playing them over the course of the season. But what's so beautiful about that is if they were cheaper, you'd be looking at a 35% offense, like what you run into sometimes with Coors Field. And it's just such an easy opportunity. I want to see this lineup. We all know that Vlad last night got stepped on by Aaron Hicks and then goes out and hits 2 more bombs after that. The guy's an absolute monster, but I just have, a little bit of concern that he might not necessarily be in that lineup. Maybe give him a day with a bloody finger or something, but he obviously looked fine at the end of that game. Maybe it's overhyped, and you take the best bat in the entire American League out of that lineup, and you're going to have Severino.
Hey, for anybody who's watching us the other day, they'll know what I'm talking about.
You're such a dick.
Emotional damage.
So the other day, for people who are watching, Eric and I are doing the show, and it's the start of the season. We have brain farts, but he just totally forgot about that Shohei Ohtani exists. So we're talking about Michael Lorenzen, and Eric called him the best hitting pitcher in all of baseball. Michael
3
Lorenzen.
years ago, he was, okay? 3 years ago, I have a home league that we have, and he had outfield eligibility. He played outfield, and he was an amazing hitter. 4.6% home run percentage, and that was near the 5.5 of Ohtani. Few smaller at bats, little smaller sample size.
All right. So once again, Eric will not back down that Michael Lorenzen is a better hitter than Shohei Ohtani. But that aside, I think these offenses are both ones that we want to be a little bit overweight to the field, and just because they're so low owned. If it gets to be later on in the day and the Yankees are popular against Kevin Gausman, I wouldn't have interest. But just the fact that you're getting so much upside at low ownership, that's what makes it reasonable. Let's move on to the next game here. And the aforementioned Shohei Ohtani is going to be on the mound for the Angels against the Rangers. Massive difference in price on him between DK and FanDuel. DK, 7,900, my favorite pitcher to roster on the entire slate. I'm all bought in on Ohtani as a pitcher this year. His stuff looked really good on opening day. I think you could make a case that he's going to be the best pitcher in the American League this year. I think the one question we'd have is just what is his workload going to look like? How many pitches and innings is he going to be allowed to throw? He is 7,900 on DK. He is 10,800 on FanDuel. The FanDuel price is way more accurate than the DK one. I don't know how there's this big of a split, but what do you make of him on the two different sites respectively?
I just love him so much. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Last season, I talked about he has the most devastating pitch in baseball. It took some people some time to come around to it, but I was all in on Ohtani. I expected the walks to start going down over time, and sure enough, we saw last year that he just kept it in check for the most part. Has unbelievable velocity, has everything you could possibly want in a pitcher here long-term. I don't really even have anything else to add. I mean, he's one of the best. He's the most intriguing, he's the most enjoyable player that I've ever seen play baseball. Like in terms of what he's able to do all around. Hit utility, his pitching. I mean, this is our modern Babe Ruth, and he comes from Japan. I love this guy. You're going to hear me talk about him constantly throughout the season. I was very high on him last year in all regards, bet him to win MVP, bet him to win the Cy Young, which didn't happen, but I'm going to be back on the well there, 18-1. That was the other guy along Cease that I bet before the season started. And I feel pretty secure in knowing that if this plays out the way that he stays healthy for the next 5 years, there's no way that he doesn't win at least one or maybe even two Cy Youngs with his stuff.
Yeah, and then when we talk about the Angels offense, here is the one problem I with Shohei Ohtani. It has nothing to do with him. It's a total DraftKings and FanDuel problem. We are now a few years into his career. What makes him so much fun and such a good novelty is that he's a great hitter and a great pitcher. Neither FanDuel nor DraftKings have figured out that you just make him eligible at both positions. So what happens when he starts, even though we have positive leverage on the Angels offense, you get one of the best hitters in baseball. You just can't play in DFS. And I do think that messes up a lot of the numbers when it comes to top stack odds, because maybe the Angels go out and they score 7 runs. If Ohtani has a homer and an RBI double or something like that, it doesn't do us much good because we can't roster him as a hitter. So it's going to be really difficult for me to get to the Angels offense on any days that he pitches for that reason, unless something changes with the lineup construction rules or the pricing or something where we could actually play him as a hitter on FanDuel and DraftKings. This is going to kind of keep me away from the Angels. Do you have the same thoughts or do you feel differently?
I do. It's a little different because you have Mike Trout now back, which we didn't have for pretty much all of last season. That made the stacking outside of Ohtani. The Angels were basically unstackable on days that Ohtani was pitching last season. And that changes a little bit when you get the protection of Mike Trout behind him and the opportunity to have, the other best hitting, you put Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Shohei Ohtani, and Mike Trout together. Those are the 3 best hitters in some capacity in the American League, and 2 of them are on the same team. So I got to think Mike Trout, 4,100 on FanDuel is still just kind of a broken tag, which is why you're seeing as much ownership as you are there. He is long-term a 5K hitter. We've paid 5K for him on FanDuel before, so I find it pretty easy to put him into lineups, and I don't completely hate some of these up-and-comers. Joe Adell's a guy I've talked about a lot who I think has a lot of power going forward. However, he's 4,200 on the DraftKings slate. I'm more inclined to stack up some Brandon Marsh. He's had a little bit of some speed utility along with some of the power. I mean, he's shown some upside towards the end of last season, had however many consecutive games with a hit to finish out the year. It's a guy that I think will be all right. Is he the most intriguing guy to put into stacks? No. But Jose Rojas, if he's in that lineup, would be all right. I'm always thinking the catchers between Stassi and Suzuki are all right to get to as well. Stassi being the assumed guy today. I'm all right stacking them up, but as you said, it's not as intriguing considering Ohtani. Is it just like a CSV thing for them where they don't want to put, just put Shohei Ohtani hitter, Shohei Ohtani pitcher, and you're done, right?
I would think. I don't know. I'm not. Remember there was the one time where they accidentally had him listed as a hitter when he was a pitcher and it broke the entire slate and they almost had to cancel it. Do you remember when that happened?
I kind of do. I mean, there's been so many instances where we've talked about this that it doesn't come clearly to mind, but I know that it's definitely happened.
Yeah, there was one time when he was pitching and they had him listed as an outfielder, and it screwed up the
that
scoring.
Would have been so fun.
It messed up some of the scoring, and then they just had to do hey, Ohtani just scores 0 fantasy points. Everybody take him out of your lineup. So I don't know what the issue is, but for whatever reason, they've not figured out a workaround for it. And it's been 4 years now. So I guess it kind of is what it is. As on the other side, when Ohtani doesn't pitch well, it tends to go really poorly sometimes. We've seen him just totally lose command of the strike zone. I think he's going to be more polished as a pitcher this year. So I am not going to really be on the Texas Rangers in this spot. I guess you can make a case for leverage on DraftKings just because Ohtani is going to be around 40% owned. But do you have any interest in Texas Ranger stacks?
Not in a stack, but this is the same thing I suppose we got to talk about last year, because there were a number of times where I'd have 75%, 80% Ohtani. And of course I would have stacks on the other side. And the one game that came specifically to mind, I had a top 5 lineup, even though I had talked on the show. I was Ohtani's going to be my guy. He walked 5 guys against the Yankees, and then the Yankees just lit him up and almost won everything on a day that I was so high on Ohtani against the Yankees lineup. He's going to have games like that where I think he just can't find the strike zone and limit it. He's gotten wild before, so I don't completely hate having a leverage stack or two in 150, but not even close to a priority. If you had to isolate one bat, I think Brad Miller is just at the top of this lineup and a guy you want to be playing. Corey Seager, we did see him get robbed. I saw it in YouTube chat. The Randall Grichuk snag in center field to rob him of his first Texas Rangers home run. Corey Seager is going to be a phenomenal hitter here long-term, but do I want to go out of my way to target them on DraftKings today? I do not. On FanDuel, though, Brad Miller's 2,800, Corey Seager's 3,200. If you want some massive leverage there, I'm okay making that like a little bit of a two-man game.
Start against the New York Yankees. He made it through 2/3 of an inning, so didn't make it out of the first inning. He walked 4 hitters, ended up giving up 7 runs, all 7 of them earned. It's funny because you talk about these blow-up starts for Shohei Ohtani. He was actually, I mean, we know he was good, but he was probably even better as a pitcher than people realized last year. It's just he had like 3 bad starts that accounted for 20% of his earned runs, or actually probably even more than that. He had 3 starts. Let's see. So we had a story give up 7 runs, 6 and 5. So 8. Yeah, nearly half of his earned runs came from 3 starts last year. And then he was just really solid on that. The point being is that in general, he's going to be good, but there are these individual ones where he kind of blows up. He's going to be my most rostered pitcher today. I think that's the pretty clear way to go, especially on DraftKings. Let's move on to the next game. But first, you guys get access to all of the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for nearly every single DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95 is going to include access to projections, premium content, ownership projections, just everything you need to build winning lineups. Also, if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, we do have MLB package available for $4.95 for a weekly pass. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. All right, let's hit on the next game, which I have listed as the Detroit Tigers at the Kansas City Royals. The pitching here is going to leave a lot to be desired. Casey Mize is one of the top pitching prospects in baseball, but he has not been able to put it together at the big league level. He started the season off really poorly, and he just doesn't generate swing and misses. As good as his stuff looks based on the eye test, for whatever reason, it does not lead to strikeouts. Hitters square him up all the time. Zach Greinke on the other side, formerly a top pitcher on baseball, just not that guy anymore. I don't really want to roster either of these pitchers today. Do you like either of them?
No. Casey Mize, it's sad too. It's the same way I feel about Chris Paddock. I don't know what scouts saw. I don't know what it's supposed to be. And going into last season, I was doing a big year-long draft, and I did a show, like the very first show of the season. It was like the day before we were doing the draft. It was just like a standalone game. And I was out asking Alex Baker, because I know he's a big Detroit Tigers fan. I was like, how high are you on Casey Mize? And he goes, not high at all. I was like, all right, that's about all I need to know there. It's just brutal that this ends up being the guy that they were relying on. He was the first pick in the draft out of Auburn, for those who don't know. It just hasn't translated. He can limit walks. That's the nicest thing I can say. There's really no velocity on the fastball. He's not getting any or any swings and misses. Bottom 20th percentile in terms of strikeout percentage last season amongst all starters. An 4.95 expected ERA, despite just a 3.71 ERA. There's some negative regression that's still in store for him.
Yeah, and once again, the numbers are just not there. And he was drafted. Was he the first overall pick in the draft? I remember at the very least he was a very high, number one overall pick.
I know, out of Auburn. Because I remember him pitching in the College World Series, and he was good, but it just didn't translate.
And you might look at his numbers last year and be like, well, he had a 3.71 ERA, almost entirely luck driven. He had a 4.89 expected ERA, a 4.71 FIP. And it's just those underlying numbers. He had a 254 BABIP, lucky, 80% strand rate, also a lot of luck driven there. From what we've seen so far, I would expect him to not really have a great season unless he makes significant strides in his swing and miss abilities. If you look at pretty much all of the projection sites, he's somebody who projects to be like a mid to high 4s ERA guy this year with a low strikeout rate. Not something I could really be all that interested in DFS. And Zach Greinke's just kind of the same, but at a more elevated age in his career now. So now the offenses in this spot, I think, are kind of appealing. The Kansas City Royals are going to be a very popular offense, but I still think it's worth a little bit of exposure to. The Tigers on the other side against Zach Greinke, this is one of my more favorite contrarian stacks on the slate because they're only projected for 4% ownership as a team. And I just don't think Greinke has it anymore. We saw now real diminished velocity in the last couple of seasons. And eventually at this age that he's at, it's going to catch up to him. Do you like the Tigers as a contrarian stack? And what do you make of the Royals as a chalkier team?
I think the Tigers, there are certain bats that I really am high on. Obviously, Austin Meadows, I'm still surprised every day by that trade. You have Torkelson, who's going to be just a monster going forward here for this baseball team. But for the most part, it's just a team that I find it hard to want to be over-invested in. I get what you're saying. The other thing, too, on DraftKings, you got to play either Cabrera or Torkelson. So that takes one of the bats that I might actually want to stack up out of consideration. Akil Baddoo, he homered yesterday, but he's just not going to be a good long-term hitter. I'm okay with it against Zach Greinke, basically pitching to contact now. He's been living on a prayer now for 2 seasons, 3 seasons. It feels like, going back to Houston even. So I'm okay full stacking them, but I'm not that enthusiastic about it. I'm sure I'll have shares in 150, but I'm more inclined to take individual shots with certain bats than I am just full stacking them. As for the Royals, there's no doubt about it. I think that they really stand out. They've got negative leverage going towards them, but it's hard not to have a little bit of interest. Basically, if you're fading Coors Field, if you're not going to be that high on Coors Field, you have an opportunity to play whatever else you want and know that relative to that one spot, you're going to be okay. And only negative 4.3% leverage going towards the stack there for KC. I just think 1 through 6, they're a lot better than they've been in a long time. So I think they make a very serviceable stack against a pitcher that neither of us believe in.
Yeah, and then one other guy that I'm going to mention from Detroit is Spencer Torkelson, another top pick in the MLB draft, who's one of the better regarding hitting prospects in baseball. He finally had a little bit of a breakout yesterday. He hit his first career home run. Another guy who projection models are super high. And if you look at like Zips and Steamer, Zips has him with a 123 WRC plus this year. Steamer is a 119 WRC plus. So even with the kind of slower perceived start to his big league career, he's a 105 WRC plus. He had a 148 WRC plus in AA last year. I think Torkelson's a really high upside prospect, and I'd rather be early than late to him. And I think now we kind of start to see him become that guy who a lot of scouts think he could be. And even coming into this year, first overall pick in 2020, mentioned that. Also, if you look at just the FanGraphs prospect rankings, he's currently the 5th ranked prospect in all of baseball. So Torkelson, I think that's another hitter for cheap that makes sense to be early on. Any other thoughts for you in this game with 2 crappy pitchers, 2 crappy offenses, but we kind of seem to prefer the crappy offenses over the crappy pitchers?
No, I talked about Torkelson. I said it sucks that you have to pick between him and Cabrera. On FanDuel, you don't have to do that, so maybe inclined over there. But on DraftKings, you got to pick one of the two. And Cabrera, as washed as he might seem to some people, still can have some pop here and there. So Torkelson, though, the priority. He's only 1% right now on DraftKings. Him and Meadows are my 2 favorite bats from the Detroit side. From the Kansas City side, it's hard to not say Bobby Witt every time.
Yeah, Bobby Witt, another guy who's kind of off to a slow start to his big league career, but I think most people expect that he's going to have a good rookie year. He remains at the top of the Royals lineup. He is the 2nd overall ranked prospect coming into this season, and also does project to be a guy who's really fantasy friendly, a little bit of power, ability to steal bases. So somebody who, even if he isn't going to be like the 120 WRC plus guy like Torkelson is, if he could be somewhere around 100 with the threat for both power and stolen bases, I expect a pretty good fantasy year for him.
And he's 2,500. That's the other thing on DraftKings. First, I think I've said this every slate that we've covered with Kansas City on it. First batter in cash. Done. Move on with your day.
All right. Let's talk about the next game. And here we've got 2 good offenses and 2 good pitchers. The Atlanta Braves against the San Diego Padres, low run total in this game. So it seems like books are projecting the pitchers to win out against the good offenses because it's Charlie Morton on the mound, Joe Musgrove on the mound for the Padres. I hate Joe Musgrove. There has been no pitcher that's more difficult to predict than Joe Musgrove. Last year, he'd be a guy. It's like, oh, look, Joe Musgrove is on the road against the Dodgers. And he pitches like 7 shutout innings with 13 strikeouts. Like, oh my God, Joe Musgrove. And then the next start he goes out, he's like priced down against the Diamondbacks for no reason whatsoever. And you get 50% ownership on Joe Musgrove. And he pitches a third of an inning, gives up 6 runs. This guy was all over the place in terms of consistency last year. Makes him hard to trust, but it also means there's considerable upside. So when I look at Musgrove against the Braves, I want exposure to him. I also want to stack against him because that's just kind of the guy he was last year. I expect more of the same. What do you feel about Musgrove in his matchup against the Braves?
Yeah, I mean, Musgrove is a guy that last year, when the sticky stuff went down because of how much curve he puts on the ball, he's in the upper 85th percentile in terms of curve spin that he puts on the ball. I find it hard to believe that everybody thought he was going to stay okay in the same way that Garrett Cole. And we still saw some massive upside from him at the tail end of last year. There were still some massive games. So I think that there's considerable upside in the arm still, but 40% owned. He's the highest owned pitcher on DraftKings. There's a broken tag at 7,600, assumably because he's going up against Atlanta. And relative to other ballparks in April, San Diego is going to play better than what people think it will. You've got the wind blowing out to right a little bit, 65 degrees. You have a 60-degree game in Coors. That doesn't really matter. 60 degrees in Kansas City, 64 in the Dodgers here, 75 in Texas. A little bit warmer. It's just one of those spots where San Diego is a better hitting environment relative to other ballparks this time of year. So just something to consider in that regard. But there's no doubt about it. I think I'm more inclined to target both of the pitchers in this game than the offenses. But I think there's considerable interest you should have on both sides.
Yeah. And we look at these pitchers also. It's not just that these are two of the quality pitchers on a small slate, but Joe Musgrove himself is only 7,600. And then we've got Charlie Morton at 9,300. So a little pricey for him against San Diego. If I had to get more exposure to one, I do prefer Musgrove to Morton. But then over on FanDuel, it's the inverse. FanDuel Musgrove is 10,300. Morton is only 9,000. So FanDuel purposes, I prefer Morton. DraftKings purposes, I prefer Musgrove. If you're taking one of them on each site, which do you think you'd be getting more exposure to?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to do that one DraftKings where you just get more exposure to Musgrove. 7,600. Again, that's just kind of ridiculous. Not that Charlie Morton 9,300 doesn't have considerable upside. He's going to be pretty flat owned. Sometimes it makes sense to just take the positive leverage and just go way over on the guy on the site that he's more mispriced. But on a one pitcher side, I'm going to have shares of Musgrove. I'm just not going to be getting carried away. Kevin Gausman, 9,600. I think you have to compare him relative to other guys in that range, in the 9K range. Charlie Morton, comparing him to Kevin Gausman. I think I'm more inclined to click on Gausman a little bit more against the Yankees. Sandy Alcantara, we've talked about a little bit, and I'm higher on Gibson as well at 9,800. So in the 9K range, Morton would be more middle of the pack, but certainly going to be higher owned because of that 9K tag.
And then when we talk about the offense in the spot, the Atlanta Braves projected for 2% ownership. Padres also projected for 2% ownership. I don't have a lot of interest in the Padres, particularly without Fernando Tatis going up against Charlie Morton, but talking about what I said before when it came to Joe Musgrove and all of just the variance that he had in his game logs, I think there's reason to look at some leverage on the Atlanta Braves and only 2% ownership on DraftKings when you have Musgrove is going to be projected at 40% ownership as just such a highly volatile pitcher. So what are you going to be doing with the Braves offense? And are there any individual hitters that stand out to you here?
Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting about this. Ohtani has the glaring weakness where he can once in a blue moon, just walk everybody and their dog. With Joe Musgrove, it's once in a while the velocity goes down or he just gets hit up. There's times where the ball will get barreled on him. He's middle of the pack for such an elite pitcher. He gives up dead middle of the pack, a hard hit percentage on the season, 51st percentile. So I'm okay if you want to try to full stack up against Musgrove with Atlanta. But as you said, with San Diego, this offense without Tatis, I just instantly knew that this was going to be a team that I wanted to target. Charlie Morton is a very serviceable arm, a guy that going back to last season had some massive potential and upside. I'm much more inclined to be going towards the pitching side in this one.
Yep, same. The Braves individually just be for a little bit of leverage, but it's not.
Who would be your favorite Braves bat outside of? Well, just who's your favorite Braves bat in general?
I didn't run crunches for today. If I had to guess, I assume it would be Matt Olson.
That's what I'm getting at. He's the one guy I think is a one-off. If you give me Matt Olson sub 3% from the left side against any righty, I'm going to take it.
Let's see. I'm just really quickly running. Yeah, it's going to be Matt Olson, especially because Ozzie Albies is better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. So Olson would be the guy. And obviously there's a lot of home run upside there. So it could be a spot where he could be the Vlad Guerrero of this slate, where maybe the rest of Toronto isn't that good, but Matt Olson is just one individual hitter who puts up a lot of fantasy points. Let's move to Coors Field. This is our first Coors main slate of the year. There's been Coors games, but they were not on main slates. And we had actually one of the games I think might have been, but for the most part, we've not seen Colorado playing in Denver on a main slate. And we have a spot here where the Rockies are going to be projected for a ton of ownership, nearly 20% on both FanDuel and DraftKings, the most negatively leveraged stack on both sites. The pitching for the Chicago Cubs, Justin Steele, he got off to a really good start this year against the Brewers, pitched a gem to open the year. This isn't a great spot for him, so I'm not going to look to roster him, but I'm going to be likely way underweight to the Rockies, potentially even taking them out of my player pool as a stack and just hoping any other team goes off. This is always what I do in these spots where there's one offense that's projected for like 20% ownership with negative leverage. And then I just hope anybody else goes off. Like those other days where we had the Atlanta Braves who were projected for 20% ownership. I didn't play them in those spots. It went poorly one time. It went really well the other times. I think that's kind of where I'm looking at the Rockies for this game. How are you going to be handling them as a massive, massive chalk stack?
This is a tough one because both of these guys, Kyle Freeland, every prototype for the pitchers that are successful in Colorado are ground ball pitchers. But Justin Steele, looking at his stuff here, kept the ball down to an 8.3 degree launch angle last season. Pretty limited sample size, under 1,000 pitches, but was a guy that had a walk problem. And that kind of is difficult in terms of if somebody's got a walk problem, I do want to get some full stacks. I want to keep that line moving. I want to get through quite a bit, but he keeps the ball down quite a bit, it seems. So I think this could definitely work out one of two ways. And I'm going to be definitely lower. I'm always inclined to go lower on the most chalky offense on the board. Yeah, I think Coors Field can just be a shootout just about any given day. It doesn't matter, good pitchers, bad pitchers. But looking at some of the stuff, I don't think I'm going to really be stacking up Colorado at all based on what I'm seeing from Justin Steele. I wasn't expecting that, but I will say not a deal. There's certain batters that it's going to be hard not to want to have interest in. Chris Bryant up against any lefty, his former team. It makes sense, but I will say I'm more intrigued at the ground ball pitching aspect of both these guys.
Yeah, and if I had to stack an offense, by the way, I'm much more inclined to get to the Cubs side of the game, just because if you look at the data we have here, starting with DraftKings, the Cubs have a 19% chance to be the top stack on the slate. The Rockies have a 15% chance. So it's about comparable. Here's the difference, though. The Rockies are projected a little bit higher of a chance for the Cubs, but comparable. But then you look at ownership. We have the Rockies on DK projected for 26.5% ownership. That's a negative 11.4% leverage score, by far the most negatively leveraged stack we've seen in the entire year. Whereas the Cubs at 19%, they're about fairly owned. So I'm cool with just being even with the field on the Cubs, even though they're popular, because our tools indicate that's, about a reasonable chance for them to be a top scoring team on the slate. And then same over on FanDuel, we have the Cubs 15% chance to be a top scoring team, Rockies 12.5%. These numbers are a little bit different because there's more games on the FanDuel slate. But then we have 18% projected ownership going to the Rockies, 16% for the Cubs. So just all things together, Rockies a little bit more popular, Cubs a little bit better chance to be a top stack. So I lean towards them as a team to line up in my lineups. And I think I'm probably going to end up with them being as one of my most stacked teams, just because it's a Coors game, high implied total, and they're not negatively leveraged in any kind of significant way. How high of a priority will the Cubs be for you?
They're going to be middle of the road priority. So it's Coors Field. It's hard not to have interest in any regard. I'm just still going through Justin Steele here. I'm doing like a major breakdown on FanGraphs, trying to figure out what I would possibly do with Colorado. It's so easy to look at the top stacks tool, though, and know that you're going to get negative leverage there. Whereas with the Cubs, which we're talking about, there's basically no negative leverage going their direction. And this offense is going to perform above expectation if Suzuki is going to be this good. Now, he is out of the gate. He is running right now, and it's very impressive. Him up against a lefty here in Freeland. I have no problems rostering him as a guy at sub 5K, still on DraftKings. Clint Frazier at the top of this lineup, 2,600. Okay, I'll amend what I said about Bobby Witt. Clint Frazier is your first batter in cash if he's going to be leading off on the road here in Coors Field. Contreras, if you can make him work, catcher, best catching hitter, best catcher on this slate, no doubt about it. Patrick Wisdom, tons of power going back to last season. Schwindel went out of the gate crazy. I think there's a lot of power, a lot of upside in this Cubs lineup compared to what I was expecting coming into this season. It really is kind of catalyzed by Suzuki.
Yeah, and by the way, as for Suzuki, just tying in a betting angle, he's still plus money to win Rookie of the Year. Some books still have him listed at plus 300. That is not going to exist for very long. He looks like legitimate real deal, and also just not that many great rookie of the year candidates in the National League this year. So I think that Seiya Suzuki, rookie of the year, I would bet him while he's still at plus money. Also, if you guys are looking for more bets, you can check out our premium betting Discord, which if you want to get access to, there's a link in the description box below. It's $25 per week, but it's going to be worth your while. We've been tracking the bets. They've been winning. It's going to be something that pays for itself in the long haul. We've got guys like Alex Baker, Ben Raza, Steve Buzzard giving out bets there. Also, check out our Twitter handle at Awesemo Bets, where we're giving out one of our premium bets per day just for free on Twitter. So different ways to get more access to betting information. Are you going to roster any of the pitchers in this game, Justin Steele or Kyle Freeland, just for contrarian purposes?
Okay, so here's what I'm looking at with Justin Steele. He's a ground ball pitcher, 50% ground ball rate, but yet 1.89 home runs per 9. That's the third worst here on this, well, amongst all starting pitchers on the day, behind Brubaker and then Lambert. We don't have to think about in the White Sox, but Justin Steele, there's definitely an inclination that when the ball gets hit in the air, it goes far, but then still 5.52 FIP, 4.21 xFIP so far in 57 innings at the big league level. So I'm inclined to just be full fade in Colorado. I know this sounds crazy, and it's the same thing yesterday where, scared money don't make money. Completely full fade Bogdanovich. This is more of a DFS angle where I think in the long run, when you're talking about 20% plus bats here, maybe you want to try to isolate some Grichuk or some Elias Diaz, some of these guys on the back half of the lineup to really get different in either a 4-man on FanDuel and a 2 or 3-man over on DraftKings. But I think I'm more inclined to just completely fade, considering every single bat is currently projected 19+% owned here. Yeah, it's a short slate, but they got a team projection under 6 total runs here. It looks like if Justin Steele can keep the ball in the ballpark, the ball's usually going on the ground. I see it working one of two ways here, and I'm just kind of willing to let my day ride on the full fade.
Yeah, there's certainly not going to be high priority pitchers for me at all. There's a part of me that wants to get some exposure to Steele just for leverage purposes because the Rockies are projected to be so overrun, but I doubt it's something I'm going to actually end up doing when it gets later in the day when I'm building lineups. But we'll see. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deeper dive and live before lock. I'll be breaking down with Adam later, and he'll help influence some of my decisions as well. Also, we have the MMA strategy show coming up in a little bit, so covering a few different sports today. The final game to hit on now on the main slate, and then people have been asking about it. Any questions you guys have about the 2-game slate, we'll talk about that after we're done talking about the Dodgers and the Reds here. Walker Buehler is going to be on the mound for Los Angeles. Probably the safest pitching option on the slate overall, just all things considered on the high end. Walker Buehler was in the Cy Young mix last year. I expect he's going to be really good again this year. The underlying numbers suggest he was a little bit lucky last season, but that's kind of been the case for a lot of his career. He's outperformed his peripheral stats. I think that just might be who he is, as somebody with a profile that limits a lot of hard contact. So with that in mind, Walker Buehler against the Reds, how do you feel about him today?
Yeah, I think in terms of security, that's kind of what you're talking about. I'm curious to see where his ownership ends up landing on both these sites. He's 9,700 on the DraftKings slate, your most expensive pitcher. I feel like there's enough bats. Well, you get Ohtani out as a one-off, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. But Walker Buehler 10-5 over on FanDuel, I could see end up getting really low owned as the day goes on here. 10.4% ownership compared to Ohtani. I think more people are going to get on Ohtani. Sure, the Texas Rangers offense is a lot better this season, but it's still not exactly good. And Walker Buehler 10-5 in between Musgrove and Ohtani. I'm kind of expecting on FanDuel to end up a little bit underowned. We know that the Dodgers, they're going to be very light on some of these pitch counts to start off the season. We just saw them pull a perfect game in 80 pitches. And, whatever your thoughts are on that, I think you got to protect the pitchers in certain spots, especially early on in the season. We saw 78 pitches out of him. I think you're expecting 80. Right. 80 pitches is about all I'm expecting from Walker Buehler here in this spot. I'm fine getting to him over the field. I think amongst those 3 pitchers, 10K and above, Ohtani 1, Buehler 2, Musgrove 3, but Ohtani 1 just simply because his upside game in this spot just is 65 on FanDuel, whereas Buehler, I think he's just going to be a very steady Eddie type player here this season.
Yeah. I think also I'm maybe a little bit higher on Buehler than you, but either way, I'm going to get more exposure to Ohtani, particularly on DraftKings, just because of the salary difference. And somebody in chat had said that they thought the salary difference was because of the different scoring. Well, if that was the case, Ohtani would be more expensive on DraftKings and less expensive on FanDuel. It's just a broken price tag for him on DraftKings. There is no reason for Shohei Ohtani to have a sub 8K salary and $3,000 difference. There's just no real situation where I think somebody should be 3,000 different on the two sides. So Ohtani's going to be my go-to guy on DK. Talking about the Dodgers offense, another one that's going to be somewhat popular today. 15% projected ownership for the Dodgers as a team on FanDuel. On DraftKings, we have them currently projected for also 15% ownership compared to 12.4% chance to be the top stack. It is a favorable matchup against Luis Sessa, but how are you going to be handling them when they are expensive with some negative leverage?
I mean, it's not fun that it's a bullpen game, but if it's going to be a bullpen game, you might as well have it be against the Cincinnati bullpen, and you might as well do it with the Dodgers offense. So 12.4% top stack percentage. I mean, it's one of those things too, where now with the DH, you don't have to think so much in the NL about who's going to pinch hit for who, especially with a team like the Dodgers. I think that puts some of my fear to rest for it. Basically flat leverage. Once again, if I'm going to be full fading Colorado, it gives me access to go crazy on a team like the Dodgers, even if there's a tiny bit of negative leverage to be had there. So I think the Dodgers offense, hard for me not to want to be not all in, but hard not for me to be very high on them if I'm going to be a little bit lower on Coors.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like I said, I'm going to be playing a lot of the Cubs. I'm going to be underweight to the Dodgers and then probably just very, very low on the Rockies. It's just too much ownership for me. I don't want to be playing them quite this much. So if I'm on the high end playing the popular stacks, I'm going to be going with the Cubs. And there's just other teams like Toronto, like the New York Yankees that I think have somewhat comparable upside to the Dodgers, also being expensive offense, but just come at a fraction of the ownership. So that's going to be for me personally where I prefer to spend up, just kind of trying to get some of the leverage there. Any interest in the Reds offense for you? Because that one's going to be a no for me.
No, probably the quickest offense to talk about without, I mean, there's just no Jesse Winker here. Mike Moustakas is dust. I really don't have anything from this team.
All right, so let's talk about the early slate now. People have been asking, so guys, you've been asking for us to talk about the early slate. I hope you guys have some questions about it, because or else, as is, we could do an overview of it, where we could say who are our favorite pitchers to look at on the small slate. It's only 2 games, so if you're trying to make me roster 2 pitchers on DraftKings, I mean, I guess Logan Gilbert is one of them, just because he's better than the other pitchers. And then as for the other guys, it's hard for me to have interest in like Josh Fleming, Cole Irvin, or Jimmy Lambert, but you're forced to pick one of them. But Logan Gilbert would be one. If you have to roster an SP2 on DraftKings, because you have to, it's how it works, who would you go with behind Logan Gilbert?
So I used to be the person who's like, oh, I'm not going to play 2-game slates. It's so fluky and ridiculous. But you're looking at a lot of leverage in terms of the most popular pitcher on the slate being Josh Fleming, and yet just being 26% compared to his 63% ownership. You don't get that kind of disparity on a main slate. So I think playing Logan Gilbert, clear-cut priority number 1, Cy Young candidate. He's going to be a stud for years to come. Combining him, I think Cole Irvin would probably be my preferred guy going up against Tampa, simply because of the ballpark and just avoiding Josh Fleming there in that spot. Looks like he's the most positively leveraged guy to get to. Jimmy Lambert would be second, but if I'm going to go for Logan Gilbert and most of those on a 2-game slate, I think I'll think about the win a little bit more, but not still that big of a consideration. It's a 2-game slate with 4 pitchers. So I think Gilbert, Irvin, moving on with my day, but I'm definitely going to have hitters from those teams in a 2-game slate going up against my pitcher.
All right. And now, yeah, that's actually something else I'll mention. In terms of hitter versus pitcher, what setting would you put it on for Fantasy Cruncher? I personally, for a 2-game slate, I don't actually play 2-game slates very often. And not this one, because I hate this slate. But if I had to, if I was playing and I was setting a rule in Fantasy Cruncher, I'd set it to 2 hitter versus pitcher. Mm-hmm. What would you be doing?
I usually allow for 2, and then depending on the pitching quality, I'll go up to 3. Again, there's viability to just saying, screw it. Maybe you could find a reliever, a long reliever or something. I'm not going to be playing that much on this. I'll maybe make a couple lineups for it, but it'd be Gilbert, Fleming, Lambert. Not Fleming. I do not want to play Fleming. That'd be like the one large stand is going that direction. And if I do play Fleming, I'd be more inclined to play 3 batters going up against him. Looking at the pitch count from last time out, I mean, he only pitched 3 1/3. So he pitched very serviceably there. I think that's why he's getting the attention that he is on this slate. But I would just be full fading on Josh Fleming in, a dozen lineups or 20 max type setting, playing more Lambert, Irvin, max of maybe 3, but most likely 2 as well. That's kind of the run of the mill answer.
All right. And then when it comes to offenses, I think this is an easy way to handle it. We have 4 offenses on the slate to choose from. Red Skittles in the YouTube chat has asked us, can we rank those 4 offenses just in terms of, let's do it by priority that we want to stack them on the early slate. Now, there's only one team that's significantly negatively leveraged, and that is the Tampa Bay Rays. They're picking up a whole bunch of ownership. For me, that is going to make them my least favorite of the 4. Could I feel great about it? No, but it's a 2-game slate. And if you're looking at how to play a 2-game slate for MLB DFS, I think we really have to prioritize ownership and finding leverage. And that for me is going to be just making the lowest priority the team with the most ownership and the most negative leverage. So we'll start there with them at the bottom. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally does. It's the same reason that Josh Fleming, is he a better pitcher than Cole Irvin? Absolutely he is. But Cole Irvin actually has an opportunity to pitch a little bit longer. Quack, quack, by the way, he went to Oregon, but hard hit percentage, 43%. I mean, it's kind of like run of the mill there for him. What's really problematic is he misses no bats in Cole Irvin, 6% K percentage in 2021. Or sorry, not 6. That can't be right. That's an error. 16.3. There we go. 16.3% K percentage in 2021. 4.92 xERA, despite just a 4.24 ERA. So a little bit of good luck in that regard. I think that looking at Tampa Bay, just neutralizing Brandon Lau, who's always been my favorite bat in that offense outside of Nelson Cruz, who's no longer there. Wander Franco long-term is somebody to be buying into. Rosarena, you get this right-hand heavy lineup. They just have so many opportunities and so many ways that this lineup can look depending on what they need. But I will say I'm not overly enthusiastic for this team against lefties as much as I am against righties going forward.
And one thing I will add to this while we're on the point, because somebody who was it, Kyle Runge asked us, what is our favorite prize picks pick for today? And here's one that does stand out. Under 4 strikeouts for Cole over on prize picks. You just mentioned it. Not a guy who generates a lot of strikeouts, difficult matchup. I don't think he's going to be having a super long leash to open the season. So under 4 Ks for Cole Irvin makes sense. Another one, Brandon Woodruff, over 5.5 strikeouts.
Yeah,
I think these Brewers pitchers on sportsbooks right now are just not being priced properly. Yesterday, we had 6.5 strikeouts for Corbin Burns. 5.5 for Woodruff is also ridiculous. The matchup against the Cardinals isn't as easy as the one Burns had against the Orioles yesterday, but these Brewers pitchers don't have pitch restrictions right now. We're seeing them go full out in their second rotation here. Burns threw close to 100 pitches yesterday. I think Woodruff probably gets somewhat of a similar leash. He sucked in his first start of the season. I don't care. I'm not that concerned. 5.5 strikeouts, too low. Sign up at Prize Picks for the first time using the promo code Awesemo. Get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit and 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. What do you make of those 2 picks, Eric? And is there anything else you would add?
Love them. I'm going to add that I'm going to correlate sometimes. I mean, Adam Wainwright, I don't really know what to think anymore. Up is down, left is right. He had a really good season. And I think going forward, I like the under of 0.5 first inning runs allowed. That's another thing that you have the opportunity to get to. Brandon Woodruff, I expect better stuff than we saw from his first outing out, and he's going to be long-term one of the best pitchers in baseball. So Brandon Woodruff, I like the over 5.5. Adam Wainwright, I'm not going to be betting him at that number, but Cole Irvin, that under is just fine for me. But I'm going to add in the under of 0.5 first inning runs.
Now let's get back to talking about the early slate. We'll just round it up here. You and I have both been on the same page. We're putting Tampa Bay last. Let's pick out our favorite offense to stack now for this early slate. So if you could only pick one to choose, I'm personally going to go to the Seattle Mariners. They are going to be somewhat popular as well, but they do have top stack odds that exceed their ownership share here on the high end. 32% chance to be the top stack, number 1 right now at our stack odds. Would they be the number 1 stack for you, or would you be looking to go elsewhere?
I think it would probably be Oakland, simply because I think it would be Oakland, or sorry, not Oakland. My God, definitely not Oakland. It would be the White Sox for me. 25% chance of saying what I meant to say. Didn't get it right. But Chicago White Sox are my favorite with Robert Robert. I absolutely love this human being. I always have. He's 5,600, 5,400. If I'm not going to be punting with Fleming, it might get uncomfortable. But even the back half of this lineup, there's power. Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets, Adam Engel. He's really not powerful, but he's a human being who exists in the world. Reese McGuire, 2,200, some salary savings. You put him into the full stack. I think if I'm full stacking up a team, I really like the White Sox today on DraftKings.
All right. It looks like we've answered everybody's question now at this point. Eric, do you have any other final thoughts on the slate?
No, I mean, I think it's a pretty fun one. We've got better pitching than you would expect for a 6-gamer. We've got some really high upside pitching. Be very sensitive to ownership in terms of the top stack odds. Pay attention to Coors. Best of luck to me not playing Coors, playing Colorado bats. That's going to go well. And we will see you guys a little bit later in the day.
Yep, that is going to do it for us. MMA strategy show coming up. We also have Josh Engelman is going to be doing some NBA best ball drafts for the playoffs on Underdog. Check that out after that. MLB deeper dive, MLB live before lock. No basketball games today, but we still got you covered with other DFS sports. Check out all of that. Like the video, subscribe. Good luck today.